What's up, everybody? I'm back, okay? I bet you thought you'd seen the last of me, but no, I am back after a brief hiatus. And guess what else is back? GoJo and Golic, because it's a Monday. It's coming to you for 2 hours. We're going to talk about everything. The Lions rolled to the top seed in the NFC, taking down the Vikings. It was amazing. Plus, MV3, did Lamar Jackson clinch his third MVP title? We will talk about that. And coaching moves. The Patriots have started off the coaching carousel. It's one and done for Jerod Mayo. We will talk about that and who we think they have their eye on. All that and more coming up on GoJo and Golic.
Here, waiting on Mike Golic Jr. We've had him, we've lost him, we've had him, we lost him. Jesse Caulfield, obviously, as she stated, is back, and may I say, better than ever.
Oh,
Jesse, very nice.
Thank you. Thank you. I had a little, it was I took the second half of my maternity leave. It was like a little 2-week vacation. I came back early from maternity leave over the summer so that I could take this during the holidays. And I just want to reiterate that maternity leave is not really a vacation. It was extremely busy, especially over the holidays. So I am back and not feeling refreshed.
You mean raising a newborn isn't like a vacation?
No.
After having an older sibling as well? That's not a vacation? Seriously?
It's not a vacation. But I did have a good holiday, Senior. What about you?
Oh, no, it was a wonderful holiday. Got to visit the newest grandchild in Boston, baby Jordan Golic. So it was Jenny and Jake's youngest daughter. So that was wonderful. I had all three of the grandkids back together for the first time. It was very, very nice. So it was very relaxing. But we are knee deep now in NFL. Well, we have the college football playoffs coming up this week that obviously we have plenty of time to talk about. But the NFL finished up its regular season last night in a game I called with Ryan Radke for Westwood One, the Minnesota Vikings at the Detroit Lions. And it was an historical night. This was the first time since 1993 that a final game of the season decided the top seed. That game in 93 was the Giants against Dallas. Before that, it was 1979, Dallas against Washington. So this doesn't happen often. You certainly don't have two 14-win teams facing each other in the last week. By the way, in 93 and 79, Dallas won both those games and got the top seed. 93, we know where they went on and they won the Super Bowl that year. So that's what was on the line with Minnesota meeting Detroit last night. It started out by Minnesota trying to infiltrate the stands. The Minnesota Vikings, before this game, during the week, you get allotted 600 tickets, the visiting team. And the Vikings on the secondary market bought $2 million worth of tickets. They bought about 1,900 tickets at $1,000 a ticket that was right behind the Minnesota bench. And then they emailed their season ticket holders, and they were selling those tickets for as low as $200 each to try and get Minnesota fans there. Detroit actually called the league and said, hey, can they do this? And the league was like, yeah, they can do it. If they choose to part with $2 million on the secondary market, that's their choice to do. So Minnesota, they did. I was on the field before the game, and there was a decent amount of purple behind the Minnesota bench, but there was way more Hawaiian blue on Detroit. And wow, what an incredible game! A Detroit just domination, 31-9. They beat Minnesota. They get the bye, which, as I'll explain, they'll need with the injuries that they have. Minnesota becomes the 5 seed, and they will be on the road visiting the Rams. So we'll get into the whole playoff scenario and picture and who's playing who and what the shifts were. But this was the biggest one. The fact that the winner of this game was the number 1 seed and had a bye. The loser would have to play this weekend not only play this weekend, but play on the road. So Minnesota finishes 14-3, and they're playing on the road with the Rams. So Detroit gets the win. I think we have Mike back, I believe, unless he
back?
can't hear us.
Can he hear us?
No, it doesn't. I don't think he can hear us just yet. So this was a 10-6 game at halftime. This was, I think, what the over on this game, I believe, was like 56, because the last time these two teams played in Week 7, it was a Jake Bates Detroit field goal with 15 seconds to go that gave them the 31-29 win. So everybody was expecting high scoring. The Detroit Lions are the highest scoring team in the NFL. Minnesota, with Sam Darnold having a career year, is a high scoring team. The Minnesota defense, which had given up the 4th most yards passing during the year, but they were the 4th best scoring defense. They had not given up a lot of points, and they had been playing well as of late. Of the 4 sides of the ball, Minnesota offense, Minnesota defense, Detroit offense, Detroit defense, it was the Detroit defense that was the iffy part of this team, of this game. In weeks 14 to 17, they'd given up 32 points a game, 428 yards a game, 321-yard passing yards a game, 7.4 yards per play, which was the worst in the league. They had the most defensive players on injured reserve, and they had been, that was the trouble spot, and Sam Darnold was having a career year. Well, fast forward, and it was an absolute Detroit domination, and you look to the Detroit side of the ball, the defensive side, the game Aaron Glenn called and the game those defenders played was masterful, holding Minnesota to 9 points. They blitzed when they had to. They loved that double A gap blitz. They just had a 4-man rush at times, most of the times, and they were getting pressure on the quarterback. It was a masterful defensive performance by the defense. And quite honestly, Sam Darnold was off. He was off in this game. He ended up being 18 of 41 for 166 yards. He was overthrowing. Receivers, and he had pressure on him. Mike, it was a difficult. While there was pressure on Darnold, he was off. I mean, we counted in the first half and going into the third quarter 6 overthrows to open receivers. And then you talk about the pressure he was getting. He was sacked twice, but he was pressured a bunch in this game.
You guys thought you were rid of. You probably thought you were rid of me, but no, I'm back. But no, Dad, I thought it was interesting last night. You mentioned the areas that Sam Darnold had excelled at for most of the year kind of came back to bite him, because for most of the season, he has been among the best quarterbacks in the NFL against pressure and amongst the best quarterbacks in the NFL against blitz in a bunch of categories. Number one, he is number one in excuse me. Number one in passer rating against the blitz, number one in completion percentage over expectation against the blitz, number one in yards per attempt against the blitz this year. The problem was he was blitzed at the 4th lowest rate in the NFL this season. So the Detroit Lions said, oh, this is just an experience and a volume problem here. We got plenty of that for you. And they blitzed him on 55% of his drop back. So that's going to be interesting for me going forward, Dad, is if more teams opt to try and do that, to see if they can rattle Sam Darnold, because that's what it looked like to me, that at some point late in this game, Sam Darnold and Justin Jefferson and that combination that had been so lucrative for Minnesota looked rattled by all of the pressure constantly in Sam Darnold's face as these extra bodies were coming his way, and he felt the pocket collapsing down around him.
And on the other side of it, the Minnesota, we know that defense, they blitzed the most in the NFL, but Jared Goff had been playing extremely, where Sam Darnold was tops against the blitz, Goff was second against the blitz. And specifically, he was successful against he's been successful against Minnesota's blitz. So Minnesota didn't blitz him as much as normal, but Goff still picked him apart. But the difference in this game was, without question, the Detroit defense and Jahmyr Gibbs on offense. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery had split time during the season, but Montgomery hurt his knee in Week 15 in the loss to Buffalo, and he had missed his third game. But Jahmyr Gibbs, in picking up the slack, he had, coming into last night's game, he had averaged 25 touches per game the last 2 games before last night. So he had had 317 yards and 2 touchdowns. Last night, he had 28 touches, and he started out the game, his first 6 carries, he gained a yard. His next 17 carries, he gained 138 yards. So, I mean, that old line, Mike, as a former offensive lineman, they just loved leaning on the Minnesota defense. The Minnesota defense was trading one for one, wasn't getting off their blocks. The O-line, the tight end, Sam Laporta and Brock Wright were great on blocking on the edges. And it was a Jahmyr Gibbs show. He rushed for 3 touchdowns, ended up rushing 23 times for 139 yards, caught 5 balls for 31 yards, and another touchdown. He had all the touchdowns in this game. 1 Jake Bates field goal and 4 touchdowns for Jahmyr Gibbs. So, and now they have the week off, so maybe they'll get David Montgomery back. They had a couple of injuries. Terry and Arnold, the cornerback, hurt his ankle. Kevin Zeitler, the guard, hurt his hamstring. But if a team that really needed a week off, Mike, Detroit got their week off to at least try and heal up some of the injured players that they have.
And at this point, how much am I supposed to believe that injuries will actually affect this Lions team? Because every time we keep saying it's supposed to happen, it refuses to happen for these guys. So I think at some point they have earned a healthy benefit of the doubt when it comes to their ability to overcome this. Aaron Glenn's phone should be ringing off the hook as we get into job opening season right now in the NFL, where we know Jerod Mayo's already been fired by the Patriots. More will surely follow. But man, if you're looking for someone who is resourceful and effective, Aaron Glenn seems to be your guy on the defensive side of the ball for what he's done with Detroit.
After starting the season 1-1, they went 14-1. I mean, you're right. I mean, because we talked about what a mash unit they were, for most of the season. Now, and another one of the keys is a guy that came back, Alex Anzalone, the linebacker who broke his forearm a couple of months ago. They were unsure if he was going to play, but the coverage, the back end, as I gave you the stats early on, had really been struggling for Detroit, and he's a great coverage linebacker, and he made his return in just under 2 months after a broken forearm where he had to get a plate inserted in his forearm, came back with a cast and played well in pass coverage. You're right. We had been talking about what a mash unit they were, yet they just kept winning and winning and winning and winning. So kudos to them. Again, it was a close game, 10-6 at halftime, and you kept waiting. Sam Darnold had the overthrows, was not throwing very well, but you knew they had the ability to strike quickly because of what the offense did. But Detroit never, ever let them.
When I made the prediction that Detroit would win, it was largely based off this is a group so sure of their culture and identity that it allows them to overcome in a way that most teams are not capable of. And that certainly shined through. The other thing, Dad, and I don't know if you mentioned it on the Jahmyr Gibbs front, just a couple of historical notes. He became the first Lions player to lead the NFL in scrimmage touchdowns since Barry Sanders did it in 1991 and set the Lions franchise single season record in scrimmage touchdowns with 20, capping off that 4-touchdown day. But Dad, I wanted to talk to you about the other side of this, because Minnesota was not without their chances, but going 0-4 on touchdowns in the red zone when you had been among the best in the league. What did you think of the play calling down in the red zone by Kevin O'Connell, especially in the goal-to-go areas where you look at their 3 goal-to-go possessions, and the last of them came in the first drive of the second half? They had, in that combined thing, 2 runs and 9 passes on goal-to-go downs, did the Minnesota Vikings. What'd you make of that?
Well, when you have Justin Jefferson, you try and throw to Justin Jefferson. Those were 2 of the multiple overthrows by Sam Darnold. He had Justin Jefferson twice in the end zone and overthrew him a couple of times. And you mentioned they were 0 for 4 on touchdowns. They had 0 for 4 touchdowns. They had 2 field goals. 2 times they went for it on downs, whereas Detroit was 3 for 3 on touchdowns in the red zone. And for Minnesota, this was deep in the red zone. This was at the 6-5, 4-yard line where they were. And the first time they got the 4th down, not shockingly, Kevin O'Connell went for it, thinking this is going to be a high-scoring affair. Field goals aren't going to do it for us. And they didn't make it. The second time he ended up kicking the field goal, and then they went for it again. It doesn't surprise me with the power that they have on offense. And Aaron Jones, he came out late in the third quarter. He had the quad injury. Cam Akers was running the ball for him. So the running game kind of took a little bit of a step back. So it didn't shock me, quite honestly, that they threw the ball. It surprised me how much Sam was off. I mean, just flat out, Sam was off, overthrowing T.J. Hockenson, overthrowing Justin Jefferson, underthrowing Jordan Addison at times. And then again, there was pressure in his face, sacked twice, made to scramble a few times as well. I really, at the end of the day, I give the credit to the rushing attack for Detroit and the defense. You're right about Aaron Glenn. I mean, his phone is going to be ringing. He has had to deal with a skeleton crew on defense, and all they've done is continue to win.
Yeah, it's been really impressive for him. For the big coaching guys in this one, Dan Campbell and Kevin O'Connell, the headmen, Dad, there were some people that thought maybe this game would be a decider for Coach of the Year, as both of these guys certainly candidates to the award. Kevin O'Connell's been a favorite for a while, but you get some late moments, and they're kind of akin, Dad, to the Notre Dame win in the Sugar Bowl, where you had some clever coaching there. You had the Detroit Lions at the end of this game on a 4th and 2 down in the Vikings red zone, managed to go and get the Vikings to jump off sides there late in that game, and another bit of gamesmanship that just reinforces how prepared this team is at every turn. Do you think this is enough to turn the tide in something like that and actually give Dan Campbell the win?
I don't think so. I think people expected Detroit to be where they are or close to where they were, even though they did deal with a lot of injuries and they did overcome that to have the number 1 seed. I don't think anybody, and I would love to see people like us, the pundits out there, on their preseason picks of where we thought Detroit. I had Detroit in the Super Bowl against Kansas City. I didn't have Minnesota making the playoffs. Minnesota's a 14-win team that is the 5th seed. 14 wins. Sam Darnold had an absolute career year. No matter how this last game went, you can't take the year he had away from him, and they're still in the playoffs. So I still think there's more of a wow factor in what Minnesota did than the expectation that Detroit would be right where they are.
I do think now, though, it'll be interesting to see how many people, with this as the final taste in their mouth, all of a sudden do they look at Minnesota a little bit differently heading into the playoffs, where, hey, for all the wild card teams, I think we can have some healthy speculation in the NFC right now. Green Bay, their questions are going to be more injury based around Jordan Love coming off that final game, but they didn't look great when he was in the game yesterday against the Chicago Bears in that final game of the season that they lose at home to Chicago for the first time in a long time. And so this division that's been the class of the NFL leaked a little bit of fuel going into this final weekend. Part of that Sam Darnold, Dad, people have always been this season looking for reasons based on historical precedent to say, oh, there's the guy that we know right now. I think, a little bit more willing to say, hey, he's been pretty damn good for the majority of this season, and I think that's going to be more often than not the guy that we get, not these iterations where, hey, you just ran into a Detroit Lions team that right now at this point in their program building was more ready for this moment than you.
Yeah. Weeks ago, I had said that about Sam on the show, wondering if he would revert back, and he didn't. I mean, he had been playing great. This was not his best game, but I would lean more to him playing well than not. He has shown too much of it, and what a matchup it's going to be now as they're the 5th seed going to take on Matthew Stafford and the Rams.
Did you apologize to Sam before the game like you said you would?
I saw him on the field, but he was kind of busy. I actually talked to the backup, Nick Mullins, but no, I did not get a chance to apologize to Sam.
Wow. right, welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr. and Mike Golic Sr. My voice and my technology at some point will cooperate on this Monday here. The haters and doubters in 2025 are conspiring against us here, but they will not win. And that's because now we've got playoff football at our backs, Dad, or I should say in front of us here. As you mentioned, we talked about the Sunday night game and the results there. A little bit lackluster relative to expectation. We expected more of a knockdown, drag-down banger. And surprisingly, the NFC South gave us that earlier in the day. Go figure. But we now have the full playoff picture set for the NFL. So in the NFC, the Detroit Lions, by winning that game, are the 1 seed. So they get the bye here in the first round. And the 2 seed Eagles get set to host the 7 seed Green Bay Packers. The 3 seed Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to host the Los Angeles or the Commanders. And the 4 seed Rams going to host the Minnesota Vikings. So, Dad, looking at that NFC playoff picture here, what jumps out at you most among these first games?
Well, I mean, the Packers losing to the Bears and going to the 7th seed and having to go to Philly is a tough road, especially with Jordan Love, who they were looking at his hand, but it turns out it was elbow. We lost feeling in the last couple fingers in the side of his hand because of an elbow injury. And Christian Watson, it doesn't look like he's going to be back. That looked like it was not a good injury to his knee. So how quickly do they heal up? And they're going to play Philly, who is playing some great ball right now. So and listen, the Vikings are a 5 seed, but the Vikings are a 14-win team going to play the Rams, who basically sat all their offensive firepower in their last game against Seattle. So, I mean, if the Vikings get themselves straightened out and play like they did through the rest of the season, that's still going to be a really dangerous team.
Buccaneers, Commanders, a matchup between a guy in Jaden Daniels, who made the Pro Bowl as a rookie, and a guy in Baker Mayfield, who a lot of people think should have made the Pro Bowl over Jaden Daniels, given the prolific offensive season that he had there. We'll talk more about that and the scenes around him and Mike Evans with Trevor Sikkema from Pro Football Focus in a little bit. On the other side, Dad, in the AFC playoff picture, no surprise, the Kansas City Chiefs had locked up the 1 seed. The Denver Broncos go out there and sandblast them and make all of the conversation about the Cincinnati Bengals or anyone else utterly meaningless as they go and get that win. So the Chiefs get the bye. The Bills will host that Broncos team that was the last one to make it in. The Ravens will host the Steelers in a matchup of teams that were both going into the weekend vying for the AFC North. And the Texans host the Chargers in that 4-5 matchup. And man, Dad, what a year it would be for Jim Harbaugh, who already got this team back to being a playoff team and now gets a Houston Texans team that we know down the home stretch of the season has not looked themselves in a while and is certainly not playing anywhere near the best ball we've seen from them in the last 2 years.
Yeah, that's a shaky 4 seed at best, right? The Texans. I mean, they have, great edge rushers in Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson, but they only have 1 receiver left in Nico Collins. This offense has basically been stripped of its parts. They're certainly a shaky team with the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh coming in. The Ravens, that's the game I'll be doing. I'll be in Baltimore for the Ravens and Steelers. They split in the regular season, but boy, they finished the season differently. Baltimore was 2 games down with 4 games to go. And all Baltimore did was go 4-0 in those last games, and Pittsburgh went 0-4 in those last games. And Baltimore takes the division by a couple of games and is playing with, and we'll start talking about the MVP. They're playing with the MVP, who's going to win his 3rd MVP in Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, let's talk about that, and let's get to some other MVP caliber moments with Mic'd Up Monday, Jesse, from what we saw in the NFL this weekend.
Yeah, we love a good Mic'd Up Monday segment, and it is Monday, so let's get into it. What better place to start, though, than with some big fellas and big sound? So let's take a listen to Michael Pierce on his eye-opening play.
I want to try for 6, so there's a long history of turning big guy interceptions or fumbles and all that stuff into memes. So at the risk of ruining a career play like that for myself, it's time to go home. So the bus was out of gas. We're good. I'm glad I caught it, more importantly. I'm going to be honest. I don't want to curse on TV, but S-word. You know what I'm saying? I say, oh, my God, he really threw this football. So, no, I got fairly decent hands. I'm glad I caught it. And like I said, Coach preached smart football. And like I said, I don't want to end up on a meme on Instagram, my wife, and everybody laughing at me. So.
Love the awareness of this generation. He's like, please, God, I don't want to be a meme. I can't do it.
I don't want to get mocked by my wife on Instagram for being a meme here. As Dad, I tell you what, he does get to live long enough to be the or die long, quick enough to be the hero, whatever the statement is, because silky hands on the interception. He does ice the game for the Baltimore Ravens at the end there. But more importantly, you saw everybody rising up, getting ready to illustrate what they thought was going to be one of the premier thick sixes of our lifetime. And that man looked at how much runway he had to go left on the field and said, no, that's somebody else's job. And I have an insane amount of respect for that.
Well, listen, I mean, that was mirror image of my 3 interceptions in the NFL, dropping into coverage and making an interception. And if I did it in today's game, I would be a meme because I had 3 interceptions dropping into covers like that. And all 3 times I was tackled by the quarterback. That's another thing you don't want happening to you. So while Michael Pierce thought he couldn't make it to the end zone, you don't want the threat of being tackled by the quarterback either. So he hit the dirt. And it was just a celebration and didn't have to turn into anything else if he tried to motor further.
It was absolutely beautiful to watch. Michael Pierce, the perfect body type, by the way, listed at the Baltimore Ravens website at 6 feet tall and a conservative 355 pounds. That is large excellence personified. So happy for him having his moment and not ending up as a meme. Dad, you mentioned it, the Baltimore Ravens finishing the season in a dominant stretch here. It seems like Lamar is going to win his 3rd MVP. He became the first quarterback to throw for 4,000 yards and rush for 800 or more yards. He has the 3rd highest passer rating of all time this season, and he's the first quarterback to throw for 4,000 plus yards, 40 or more touchdowns, and only 4 interceptions on the season. So even by his own insane standard, this year was on another level in a year where the Ravens became the first offense to finish with 4,000 passing yards as a team and 3,000 rushing yards and had the highest yards per carry average in NFL history. So that seems like the recipe for him to win the MVP, Dad. The question going forwards is going to center largely around Zay Flowers and his health coming out of this game. He suffered a knee injury that really, I mean, you saw that passing offense doesn't look the same when Zay Flowers isn't out there, the first Pro Bowl receiver in Baltimore Ravens franchise history. That's the importance he's had to this team. And if he's not full go in the playoffs, Dad, all of a sudden you start having similar worries about can the Baltimore Ravens weather the storm on that.
Yeah, and so let's see how much rest he needs. If he needs any rest, they don't get a bye. As I mentioned, they're hosting Pittsburgh, who they split with. We know Pittsburgh has a very, very tough defense. So yeah, that's a big question mark whether he'll be back. I mean, it's the one thing you look for in Week 18, the last week of the season, is playoff teams if somebody gets hurt, and there were a number of players that got hurt. And quite honestly, teams that are out of it, if a player gets a major injury and all of a sudden in the last week of the season, they're now rehabbing the entire offseason. I mean, it's just something you so want to avoid. You want to avoid it anyway, but in the last game of the season when you're not going anywhere is a horrible thought, just as bad, obviously, as a player who may not be there for their team in the playoffs. So they seem a little more optimistic about Zay Flowers than about Christian Watson from the Packers, that's for sure.
Yeah, John Harbaugh's quote was, it's something he has a chance to be okay with. So hopefully encouraging signs there, because again, I'd imagine this is going to be an MVP season for Lamar. It wasn't like yesterday lit up the world while, you had Josh Allen on the sideline for the Buffalo Bills. But I just think the closing argument at the back end of the season probably going to be too much. Jesse, let's move on to some sound from a former MVP who may have played his final game.
Yeah, so Aaron Rodgers joined the 500 touchdown club yesterday, which was pretty cool, but he also has some uncertainty about his future, as we know. Not a great season with the Jets. Here's what he had to say.
I knew my times, I think, in 2022 was done in Green Bay. I just felt like it was time for all of us. It was unsaid, maybe on their side, but it was understood, I think, by all of us that it was time to go separate ways. I needed to figure out whether I still had a desire to play or not, whether I could get the love for the game back. I have tremendous love for the game now. I don't feel that. So I can't say that it feels anything like that. This feels much different. It feels like just need to get away and then also see what they're into, what they're thinking, and then take some time for myself.
That statement was like, he was like trying to figure out what the Jets were going to say before he figured out what he was going to say. He was like, I don't know how I feel. I don't know how they feel. Like, it's like he's trying to gauge if they're going to break up with him or not to figure out what he wants to say to the media.
Yeah, I don't know where Aaron's at. It seems like he's in a position to take some time right now and figure this out. And Dad, quite honestly, I joked it's like the birdie on 17 or 18 after a bad round of golf that gets you coming back. That was yesterday for Aaron Rodgers. He played phenomenal in that Jets win against the Miami Dolphins. There looked like some vintage Aaron Rodgers stuff. And Jesse mentioned off the top, he became just the 5th NFL quarterback to throw for 500 or more touchdowns in his career. He joined Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Peyton Manning, and his old teammate Brett Favre in that distinction, and him and Devontae Adams with their 83rd touchdown actually passed Dan Marino and Mark Clayton. They now went into third all-time among quarterback receiver tandems on the touchdown list. They're behind Peyton Manning and Marvin Harrison and Steve Young and Jerry Rice. So if yesterday was his last day, and Dad, a lot of similar visual notes when he walked off in Green Bay with Randall Cobb, this time walking off the field with Devontae Adams here, he does seem to kind of be at peace with whatever happens going forward, and it doesn't change the nature of the fact that yesterday was an incredible accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, listen, he as we've talked about with Aaron Rodgers, no matter the how polarizing he is in his comments outside of football, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. He walks in, he's in the big room in the Hall of Fame with quarterbacks. That's how great of a quarterback he was. But he's done with the Jets. The Jets are going to have a whole new GM down to coaching, head coach to assistant coaches. They're going to have a different quarterback. It's not going to be Aaron Rodgers. The question is going to be, even if Aaron Rodgers wants to keep playing, will there be a spot for him somewhere in the NFL? Now, we have new head coaches to figure out, new schemes, new coordinators to figure out before we see if we find a place for Aaron Rodgers. But if he walks away from the game, and players are prideful, everybody like to walk away on their own terms. And a winner, but not many can walk away holding a Super Bowl over their head like a John Elway. That's way more the exception than the rule. If he's done, it's had a Hall of Fame career. If it continues for another year or so, which I don't think he will, he still have a Hall of Fame career.
That's going to be the interesting part, Dad, is does yesterday energize him? And did yesterday also do enough for some teams to go, all right, well, now maybe with a year under his belt and a little more recovery, you're finally getting back closer to the guy that you thought you were going to get to the point where can he help somebody else out? I still think that's going to have more to do with what role Aaron Rodgers is okay accepting at this point in his career. He's already talked about being open to being more of a mentor to a young guy if the Jets choose to go that route and wanting to be back with them. And so I think that's going to be the thing that, obviously after the soul searching of does he want to play at all or not, is he willing to accept a different role here? And does another team see that? Because again, yesterday was a hit of the good stuff in a way that could get somebody off the back on the narcotic of Aaron Rodgers if they so choose. In a year again where I feel like we have to underscore this every time, there aren't going to be a lot of compelling quarterback options in the market.
No, they're not. And what's a team trying to accomplish? Is it going to be a bad team trying to rebuild? You're not going to rebuild with Aaron Rodgers. Is it going to be a great team trying to go the distance? Is it going to be a team that needs a bridge quarterback? And you're right. Does Aaron want to be a bridge quarterback? I mean, there's a lot of questions still to be answered before we know if he's playing again.
Yeah, so that's going to be interesting. Marshall Newhouse, Aaron Rodgers' former teammate with the Green Bay Packers, is going to join us in hour number 2 of the show. I'll be curious for his read of what he saw from 12 in terms of his abilities to go out. And I heard Greg Olsen say it on the broadcast yesterday. Are there still 32 quarterbacks in the NFL better than the guy that we saw play yesterday? I'm not sure the answer to that is yes, but I'm also not sure, Dad, that that's the only justification for should he be the guy for your organization.
It's absolutely not the only justification because there's no way there are 32 better quarterbacks than Aaron Rodgers, but you have to put a lot more thought into it because of his age and injury status about whether you want him on your team or not.
Yep, all those going to be questions there. We'll get to in a little bit some compelling sound from Tyreek Hill and Mike McDaniel, as it seems like that marriage has certainly soured between receiver and organization swiftly in Miami. But coming up next, one of the best moments of the weekend, Mike Evans going over 1,000 yards at the end of the Bucs game. We'll talk to Trevor Sikkema about his impact on this franchise next. All right, excited to talk to Trevor Sikkema here in just a second. Lead draft analyst over at Pro Football Focus, does a phenomenal job, cut his teeth covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and so we'll be very curious for his perspective on the scenes that we saw yesterday with Mike Evans and how hard that team worked to get him over that 85-yard threshold for the game, to get him over 1,000 yards again for the season in his career, something that has become par for the course for a future gold jacket player there. But, Dad, some big news on the NFL coaching front this morning. As we know, these moves were going to start coming fast and furious, and they have here. The first announcement from the Jacksonville Jaguars, they have fired their head coach, Doug Peterson. Doug Peterson, 22-29 during his 3 seasons in Jacksonville, 8 losses in their last 23 games. That had been leaking fuel for a while here, but as Adam Schefter notes, who reported this, the key here is that it appears that general manager Trent Baalke will stay on and be part of the decision along with Shad Khan about who will come next year. I am stunned that Trent Baalke continues to persist here and get this opportunity, but that's certainly the case there. And then the New York Giants announced that Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen, the GM and head coach, will both be retained this upcoming season for them. And so those two guys going to stay on here. But again, Doug Peterson out now. So currently 5 head coaching openings in the NFL. As we know, the Saints, the Jets, and the Chicago Bears had already been open during the season, and the Patriots and now the Jacksonville Jaguars jobs open with that here. So as we react to that here, Trevor Sikkema, kind enough to join us now and jumping in here again. You can check him out. Phenomenal work over at Pro Football Focus. One of our favorite guys here. Trev, busy Monday, man. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Of course, the news had to break, right as I'm coming on this show. So I hope that that's good for the conversation and that I have enlightening things to say here about this, as much as the draft and the playoffs as well. But appreciate you guys having me on.
No, definitely, man. Thanks for stopping by. And I mean, let's start with that. Your reaction, Doug Peterson out and Brian Daboll staying on as the Giants head coach. Do either of those surprise you?
So not really. I mean, I am a little bit shocked that Daboll is getting another year here. Now, I actually like it. We went through an exercise on the podcast that I do with Connor Rodgers called the NFL Stock Exchange, where we sort of fix every franchise. And we did this a while ago because the Giants have been bad for a while. So we did this many months ago and things have changed a little bit. And as the Giants have sort of become apathetic and it's felt like the fan base has just not had a lot of energy for this team, I felt as though, even though I like who Brian Daboll is as a head coach, and even though I don't feel like he got his rightful shot to pick his quarterback in New York, it just felt as though they were probably going to move on. And I don't hate this move because, again, I like who Brian Daboll is as a coach. I don't really believe that Daniel Jones was their guy. I think they were in a tough situation where they sort of jumped the shark in their first year there. They make the playoffs. They have a ton of success. And then it's like, all right, time to make a decision on Daniel Jones. And you have to, sign into a big contract or let him go completely. And in a league where quarterbacks are everything and you don't want to give up the success that you just had, it's really tough to do that, even if the criticism of Daniel Jones' ceiling was legitimate. So I wasn't so sure that he was actually going to get this opportunity, him and Joe Shane, to pick their quarterback. And now at number 3 overall, all right, maybe it's not number 1 like it could have been before they won a couple of weeks ago. They are going to get that chance this year. So I am glad about that because I do think that Brian Daboll kind of deserves that as one of the better offensive minds in the league. Not shocked about Doug Peterson. This has sort of been the worst kept secret. I am shocked that Trent Baalke is still there. I agree with you. I mean, he is somebody who has had ample amounts of time to retool this roster and surround Trevor Lawrence with a coaching staff and a roster caliber of not just making the playoffs, but be a consistent football team in this league to make deeper playoff runs and potentially a Super Bowl push. And they're no closer to that since the day that he started as the general manager at that organization. So that I am very shocked about that he is still there, especially with a lot of top tier head coach candidates. We think of Ben Johnson. We think of Mike Vrabel, where we go, those guys are going to want general manager control as well. Maybe not in the sense that they have both seats like Belichick did, but they're going to want to have their pick of general manager. They're not going to want to go into a situation where they don't know if they agree with the general manager or not. So that to me is also incredibly shocking that they would keep Baalke, knowing that probably their top 2 head coaches wanted to pick their own GM. So that's a shock to me.
Yeah, I agree. That seems to be the most surprising thing out of this. And you mentioned that Daboll and Shane will get to pick their quarterback. They picked 3rd. Tennessee Titans picked 1st. Cleveland picked 2nd, and the Giants picked 3rd. And the talk is that there are really 2 first-round quarterbacks, and that might even be a reach at 1 and 2 in Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. Tennessee probably looking for a quarterback. Cleveland, even though they have to pay Deshaun Watson, will probably grab a quarterback. It'll be interesting, the top 3 teams, because the 4th pick is the Patriots, and they don't need a quarterback. But the top 3 probably looking for quarterbacks. Also, the 6th pick, the Raiders will be looking for a quarterback. Usually there's 5 to 7 head coaching jobs available. Right now there's 5. Do you see a 6th with the Raiders being available?
Yeah, that's the one where it's sort of like a tough deal, right? I mean, if they moved on from Antonio Pierce because they had a guy that they knew they could really get in the building and felt like the ceiling was a lot higher, I understand. But if not, man, it's a tough process to have a guy who really comes in as an interim last year, saves the team, comes in this year. Very clearly, the roster is just not what it's needed to be. I think the biggest indictment on Antonio Pierce this season, though, because you could say, oh, they didn't have a quarterback. They weren't aggressive enough going to get one in a strong quarterback class last year to invest in a franchise guy. So they kind of got left at the altar, if you will, picking too far outside. Maybe they didn't know that the quarterback run was going to happen with all those quarterbacks in the top 12. But hey, it is what it is. They didn't get aggressive enough for one, and they sort of settled for Aiden O'Connell and what Gardner Minshew could have been. But the real indictment, if they're going to fire Antonio Pierce, to me, it's the defense. Now, they went through injuries. Obviously, Christian Wilkins, their prize free agent, he was banged up this season. Max Crosby missed some time as well. But, man, the secondary struggled. Man, it felt like the second level really struggled as well. And even the players that were around Crosby and Wilkins, I know their presence being in and out would have helped those guys a lot. But the defense totally regressed to me. And if that's Antonio Pierce's side of the ball and that's his expertise, and if being that motivator and somebody where the defense is always going to have a decently high floor, if that was the billing of why you wanted to retain him, sort of as that player's coach, that former player type of a player's coach feel, that took a step back this year. So even independent of the quarterback situation, I would not be shocked if Antonio Pierce is part of Black Monday as well.
Dad mentioned the draft order and the lead to this conversation here, and I wanted to ask you about that. You do a phenomenal job and always have of draft coverage and do so now at Pro Football Focus. But he mentioned there's a lot of need up at the top of the draft, and it doesn't seem like a ton of inventory. So now that we have the draft order solidified, we know the Patriots win yesterday probably caused a lot of their fans some consternation because they were sitting pretty in that 1 pick now. How does this change the way you view what the top of the draft could look like in terms of order?
Yeah, a lot. lot. You know, I've been talking about this over the last couple of weeks. The Patriots getting the number 1 overall pick was pretty important for them. And it's not important for them because now, like, they don't have the opportunity to maybe pick the player that they want because, like you mentioned, they have the quarterback. And so anytime that that's the case, you're not as desperate to pick at number 1. The reason why I felt like it was very important for them to stay in that 1 spot is to trade back. Now, you weren't going to get 3 first-round picks like maybe in some other classes because you didn't have a prospect with that sort of caliber of a price tag on them. But you still trade back a couple of spots, go to 4, go to 5, get the prospect that you want, get a prospect that could really help you, maybe an offensive lineman, one of those top wide receivers, somebody who's going to be a dynamic player for them on the offensive side of the ball. You can pick up an extra first-round pick next year, right? And an extra first-round pick's an extra first-round pick. All right, maybe it's not 3, but it's still 1. So for a Patriots team that, in my opinion, is by far the least talented team in the NFL top to bottom, that is what they're actually missing out on. Not necessarily the prospect at number 1, maybe like a Travis Hunter, if they would have picked Travis Hunter at number 1 overall, maybe an Abdul Carter, if you love him as a pass rusher. You could still get good playmakers, pass rushers further down into the top 10, and being able to move from that top spot. I think that's the part that really cost them, which now sets things up really well, in my opinion, for Cleveland at number 2. I don't know if Tennessee's going to be that team to really move on from number 1. Like you said, they need a quarterback pretty badly. If they can't hit one in free agency, they're probably going to want to make sure that they get their guy and they'll stick at number 1 for it. But Cleveland, I know they said that it's no guarantee Deshaun Watson's 100% going to be the starter going into next season. It's going to be a full competition. They're going to look at all of their potential options. But Cleveland now becomes that team where maybe, if, like you said, if enough teams believe that there's 2 quarterbacks that could go in the top 5, maybe their film grades aren't exactly that high, but we know how it is. 2 types of teams in this league. You either have a quarterback or you don't. So a lot of the teams that don't, maybe they say to themselves, well, all right, let's say the Tennessee Titans take Cam Ward at number 1. Well, shoot, if we don't get up to number 2 and get Shedeur Sanders, at least we're going to be up a creek without a paddle. And so now you get a little bit of desperation in there. I wonder if that's enough for Cleveland to move back from number 2. So a lot of fun conversations that we're going to have with this draft order here. But as it solidified yesterday, those are a couple of these storylines that came to my head immediately.
Also, a good conversation, and the feel-good moment of the day was Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa Bay, they got the win, and they're the 3rd seed, I believe, now in the NFC. They get the win over New Orleans, but it looked like Mike Evans, who again only played 14 games this year out of the 17, was going to fall short of his 11 straight 1,000-yard season. New Orleans had the ball trying to come back with under a minute to go, and Mike Evans was, I think, 4 yards short. Tampa Bay gets the ball back. They go out with their offense. They could have knelt on it. They don't. Thank God they didn't. Throw a pass to Evans. He gets enough yards to have 1,004 yards to tie Jerry Rice for 11 consecutive seasons of over 1,000 yards. Obviously, it has to be the feel-good moment of the weekend, right?
It was so much fun to watch. And as somebody who grew up just south of Tampa, I watched as many Bucs games as I possibly can, trying to cover the entire league as well. But I was following the storyline as closely as anybody. And I'm not going to lie, when their second to last drive stopped and they were able to get a touchdown and Bucky Irving runs that in for a touchdown, and you go, oh no, he's going to come up 4 yards short, because even if they stop the Saints don't have enough timeouts. They could just kneel the ball out. They could just kneel and the game will be over. When the Bucs got the ball back, Todd Bowles is, I don't want to make him sound like you said, stuffed up kind of a guy, but like he's a by the book kind of a guy. He's been around the NFL for a long time. He respects the game so much. There's things you do. You don't rub it in you don't rub it in the opponent's face. You don't taunt. You don't like run up the score when you don't have to. And so I thought, oh no, Bowles is going to respect the sanctity of the game so much that he is going to, do what you're supposed to do here. And he's going to kneel it out. And you could see when the Bucs got the ball back and Liam Cohen walks over to Todd Bowles and they actually start having a conversation. I say to myself, oh, are they actually going to do this? And then Baker Mayfield comes and walks over to him. And then when Baker starts to talk to him, I'm like, they're going to do this. And then the only thing that you're worried about then at that point is the New Orleans Saints giving Mike Evans the Calvin Johnson treatment and putting 2 players, up against him in man coverage on the line of scrimmage and press coverage. They ended up not doing that. And it's a great moment for Mike because, I'll say this as well. The injury was tough, thinking that the streak was going to end. I know it means a lot to him, but more importantly than that, Mike Evans over the last 3 weeks, I genuinely believe this. I've watched a lot of Mike Evans over his career, almost all of it. He looks as good right now as he has in the last 5-6 years. I mean, I don't know if it's because his body was able to, have a little bit of time off as he was healing that hamstring injury, but he looked more explosive. He looked more focused. He looked more determined, now above the age of 30. And this is the best Mike Evans has genuinely looked in 5 to 6 years. And that's a huge thing for the Buccaneers as they head into the playoffs. So even independent of the record, this has been a player that is the true definition of a wide receiver one that we have seen from Evans over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, Larry Fitzgerald came on our show and said probably the most underrated wide receiver of generation somehow for a guy that's going to wear an incredible gold jacket 5 years after his career is done for just what you mentioned here, and going to help the Bucs in the meantime try and go out here and win a playoff game and keep this thing rolling for a season that's been pretty incredible and had that great moment to cap it off there. Check him out again over at Pro Football Focus. Phenomenal work out there. Check out the NFL Stock Exchange. It's awesome stuff as always. Trev, can't thank you enough for the time this morning, man. Really appreciate it. Always great catching up with you.
Appreciate it, guys. Anytime.
Thanks, Trevor.
The proud third member of a group chat also dedicated solely to Crab Rangoon talk, which is a story for another day there that we can get into. But yeah, Dad, listen, Trevor is a man with many proclivities that you would love here. The 3-side minimum when it comes to barbecue. He's a guy after your own heart.
The Crab Rangoon. Wow, you had me at that. My mouth's watering.
All right, well, if you like Crab Rangoon, you'll love what we have coming up for you next. Marshall Newhouse. I don't actually know how those two things are related. You guys can figure it out during the break. We'll be back soon. All right, before we get to Marshall Newhouse and more Crab Rangoon talk here, it's time for DraftKings crowning moments here, where we highlight some of the best bets and wins from you guys out there in the world of sports. And this year we felt like we'd give some love to one of the biggest winners from 2024 here, a bettor who turned a $5 bet on a 14-leg anytime touchdown parlay into $489,383.01 for good measure here. Christian McCaffrey, the final leg to cash this parlay. parlay that included Calvin Ridley, James Conner, Jerome Ford, Chris Rodriguez Jr., and more. An absolute banger. Crowning Moments is presented by DraftKings. Submit your winning bets for a chance to be featured. DraftKings, the crown is yours. We pass the crown to Marshall Newhouse for some large excellence starting hour number 2 next. Hour number 2, GoJo and Golic here. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., Jesse Cofield back to start her new year. And Marshall Newhouse, 11-year NFL veteran and Super Bowl champion, kind enough to join us now as well. Proud Horned Frog alum. You guys can check him out as a part of the pregame Power Up on DraftKings Network. Mondays and Thursdays throughout the seasons at 6 o'clock Eastern. Great stuff as always. Marshall, good morning, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Good morning, fellas. We got through that slop of Week 18. Now it's time for the real stuff, right?
I gotta say, and both of you guys, Dad, you and I hadn't really mentioned this. Week 18 is always a mixed bag because we know you've got varied levels of interest in here. Can we give a little bit of love to the 1 o'clock window where it may not have been full of games that had inherent value here, but the NFC South where there was a spot up for grabs and you had the Falcons and the Bucs, it appeared for a while, both trying to lose that as you had division games to finish off there. Some very entertaining games. And for specifically that Bryce Young-led outfit for the Carolina Panthers here, I know it wasn't a game that had a lot of meaning, but if you're a Panthers fan, and I know David Tepper after the game got asked about and said, I think we've got our quarterback for the future here, you got to feel good about the back half of the season and the final game performance that Bryce Young, he was swagging out doing the no-look touchdown celebrations by the end of that thing.
Yeah, listen, we make fun of that Week 18, but there's some teams that had a lot to lose, and there are teams that didn't have much to play for, and we got some pretty good, compelling games. And yeah, Bryce Young, 5 touchdowns. Just literally since his benching, he has looked like maybe the best rookie quarterback in that class. All the things that we talked about when he was struggling, his stature, his lack of arm strength, him not using the mobility that we saw in college. suddenly something clicked. I don't know what in Charlotte, if he had just a soulful meal, he had some collard greens or something, and it just turned something back on in him. And he's been playing lights out. And I agree with David Tepper. He's a guy that you can now feel like you can build around. Dave Canales, I feel like you think there's some excitement there. If you can get him consistent protection, you go get him up some more weapons on offense, he can help you win games very, very quickly.
Well, I tell you what, a guy that just like the phoenix rising from the fire. We thought his career was done in Carolina and would start the backup role in other places. Just absolutely saved himself. We can't say the same for
Senior.
Yeah.
That's the fact that we buried him so fast is insane. It made no sense in the moment, and we were all caught up in, he looks terrible, but he was 4 games in his rookie career. I have to just say, anyone who really buried him in a legitimate way, asking him to get traded that quickly, I think people need to capitulate, because that's crazy to me, regardless of how well he's done since. The fact that we turn on rookie quarterbacks so quickly now is just wild to me.
I do think that's like an important note going forward. And hopefully Bryce Young can kind of be that case study of, hey, just because a quarterback gets sat down does not mean, Dad, that this is the end of things here. And Bryce is going to be one of the few examples because, listen, this is a combination like Anthony Richardson's going to be a weird offseason for the Colts based on what's gone on with him again. Injury, a part of that conversation, makes it a little bit different here. Will Levis probably going to get shown the door, doesn't have the 1 next to his name in the draft profile. So we know that changes some things. But Dad, I do think that is important. Like Bryce Young and what he represents in quarterback discourse, because of what Marshall brought up, feels important coming off this season.
Yeah, I listen. I agree. To give up on a top pick like that quick would have been ridiculous. We know they give up on coaches a lot quicker than they give up on top picks. As Jerod Mayo was fired after 1 year, he's the 13th head coach since 2011 to be fired after 1 year, and the 6th since 2000. There were 2 in 2021. Urban Meyer and David Culley. In 2022, there were 2, Nathaniel Hackett, Lovie Smith. In 2023, it was Frank Reich. And now in 2024, Jerod Mayo. So it is amazing how these owners want to pay multiple coaches for not working and the new ones for working. What did you think of the Jerod Mayo firing after just 1 year?
Yeah, listen, I think multiple things can be true. I think he was set up to fail. You give him a rookie quarterback and the cupboard being bare with talent, both on the offensive line for that rookie quarterback and then on significant parts of the defense. So I think he was set up to fail. I think they pulled the cord too fast. I also think he showed that he was a little bit underwater most of this season. There are things that we're used to seeing the Patriots do, not even the Patriots, just winning, upward trajectory leaning football teams do, that they were just not doing. They were not taking care of the football. They were not being very calculated in critical game situations. It looked like they were unprepared at times. And so I can see why Kraft would want to pull the cord on what feels like a mistake, because he anointed him. He's like, I chose him 3 years prior to be our head coach. So to do that and then to yank this guy after a year feels just like, lacks foresight, which we're not used to seeing from a team that had multiple Super Bowls and a Hall of Fame coach there for 20 years. And so they're going to have to really figure out who they want to be. It sounds like also the availability of Mike Vrabel played into the urgency. I get that, but this was just an abject failure for, from the end of Bill Belichick's tenure, they go 4-13, things look bleak, to now this 1 year of Jerod Mayo. I have not seen them this rudderless in a long time. And so I just hate people calling for coaches to be fired, but he seemed overwhelmed at times. Absolutely.
Yeah, I do think that availability of Mike Vrabel and what he represents, probably the biggest factor in all this that exacerbates everything that you just mentioned there. Because you're right, now post Tom Brady, we've watched them botch a first-round quarterback in Mac Jones with the way they handled it, and their next coach beyond Bill Belichick in the way they've handled this. So not a ringing endorsement of the franchise overall, but one that could get bailed out. I saw Jeff Howe, a national reporter over at The Athletic, say that there is belief among sources close to the situation that Mike Vrabel has been interested in the Patriots' potential vacancy in recent weeks, and he'd have some quality assistants who'd be prepared to go with him if it unfolds that way. So that was my first thought, Dad, was they've got to kind of know that there's some interest here if they're willing to do something that is objectively as big of a eyesore on the organization as this move is. Because like we talked about last week, unfortunately, the reality is if you could swap Jerod Mayo for Mike Vrabel because you've got, hey, oh, by the way, this young quarterback that you hit on, like in the middle of a burning ship this season, Drake May looked like a dude, and Mike Vrabel is a proven winner at coach. And so if you can put him around there, I know the OC hire matters a lot, but in terms of what Marshall talked about, the culture around the building and being able to handle the rigors of the job, Mike Vrabel certainly more prepared for that, while the stakes are very high with Drake May.
Certainly going to make a mockery of the Rooney Rule yet again in the NFL, which is kind of a mockery of a rule. Moving on, Marshall, do you think Aaron Rodgers is a starting quarterback for an NFL team next year?
I think he will be, because when he shows up and does what he's capable of doing, even at his advanced age, it's crazy to talk about. He can still win you football games. Now, he hasn't shown us that in 2 years, and that's the unfortunate part. The Achilles was unfortunate. This season just completely crumbled underneath him. But I believe, and this is not just because I played with him, I believe were he not with the New York Jets, he could lead a team to, at worst, 10 wins. We saw, I think 15 teams won 10 games this year. I absolutely think he has the ability in his arm and his mobility that's left in him to win 10 games. That would take a level of humility on his part. Hopefully an offensive coordinator that can establish a run game, that could get more creative and not make him just a drop back quarterback, that would work with him with the freedoms that he likes in his offense and the nonverbal communication he likes with receivers, and then also establishing, some kind of balance on offense. Quarterback is always going to be the most critical position in this game. And at any given time, there's only about 17, 18, 19 suitable, serviceable quarterbacks that can win you football games. He's still in that mix. It's kind of crazy to think about. It's so new for us between him and Tom Brady, guys being capable at this late age where your brain goes, this can't be true. They got to put him out to pasture. Certainly there's nothing left there. But when, there are enough moments where if his head was screwed on right and he just wasn't with the Jets and their dysfunction, I believe that he's good enough to at least win you, a poor division like the NFC South, or a poor division, which was this year outside of the Bills, the AFC East. So does that mean someone's going to bring him on and take on that risk? That's a whole nother discussion, but I think he could do that for someone in the right situation.
It's complicated now because they've got the number 1 overall pick, but what you described in that situation of a team dedicated to the ground game, a coach that's used to being around a quarterback who's got the full reins of the offense here, made Tennessee sound like a very interesting landing spot coming off the Will Levis experience there with Brian Callahan and company there, and what he was used to with Joe Burrow and with what that offense under his dad and the rushing attack and that O-line could be. It's interesting, but again, complicated now because they sit there with that ultimate draft prize of that number 1 pick spot here. Marshall, let me ask you that about another quarterback here. Is Kirk Cousins a starting quarterback come next season here in Atlanta or elsewhere?
That one feels done. And I give Kirk a lot of credit. He's been the, salary Hall of Fame kind of guy with his contracts, but that Achilles did more to him than Aaron Rodgers' Achilles, obviously, and other guys at that age. He just didn't look the same. And, it's fresh off of it, so I understand that. But you couple that with Michael Penix looking like, okay, he might have the chops, and we're still figuring that out. His time in Atlanta is definitely done. But, the same thing applies as far as there aren't right now enough serviceable quarterbacks in the NFL. It is a scarcity. And so someone's going to give him a chance. I just don't think he's got it left in him, because what we saw was he couldn't even push off of his legs to hand the ball off correctly consistently. He was struggling to get stretch footwork to Bijan Robinson. He was struggling to push off of his legs. We all know how much your lower body channels a quarterback's accuracy and his throwing power. He struggled to do that at times this season, under center, all that kind of stuff. And so I have more worries about Kirk Cousins. And on top of, he hasn't been a quarterback who was here, who won you a Super Bowl. So he's already operating from a place of lack, I think, of a perception where who is Kirk Cousins going to take over the top? Who is Kirk Cousins going to bring and deliver a playoff run in a Super Bowl? I just don't see that right now.
Well, I mean, and who would trade for that contract? And by the way, if they let him go before the 2025 season, they'd owe him $90 million, and they could do it after June 1st, and they could split that. They could split that over 2 years. Now, the only good thing is he's going to be a highly paid backup to a rookie wage scale quarterback than Michael Penix. But I don't know who's going to trade for that deal. Really quickly, Marshall, here at the end, which wild card team, the Chargers, Pittsburgh, Denver, Minnesota, Washington, Green Bay, do you give the best shot of pulling off a win?
Listen, despite last night, I feel like, Kevin O'Connell was in the running for Coach of the Year. I think that's going to go elsewhere now, but I still give Minnesota a shot in one game scenario. The way that Brian Flores can kind of make your quarterback, put him in hell, put him in kind of a awkward situation, and the way Sam Darnold has shown us to play before, last night, I still think Minnesota on a one game scenario is dangerous. Listen, Denver is not a team I want to see right now either. We talk about head coaches and matching them with a young quarterback. I worry about defensive-minded coaches getting with these young, budding quarterbacks. The Sean Payton, Bo Nix thing, he's brought more out of Bo Nix than any of us really thought was there. And so that shows you just how much that matters to be in sync between the head coach, play caller, and a quarterback talent. And so I'd say Minnesota first, Denver is definitely dangerous as well.
Quietly, this whole rookie class of quarterbacks, like Caleb Williams, obviously there were well-publicized struggles there, but all of them have flashed some pretty good stuff at different points this year, which we talk about the hit rate on all these guys being low historically, but pretty impressive class from top to bottom. And Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels both now get to help try and lead their teams to some playoff runs there. Marshall, always great catching up with you, man. Always appreciate the time. Thank you so much, sir. We'll talk to you again next week, all right?
Appreciate it, fellas.
Yeah, Dad, that Denver Broncos team obviously rolling in frosty off beating the Chiefs team that was starting nothing and no one, but that's a group all year that has played incredible ball on defense, and Bo Nix has grown more and more as the season's gone along. They get to try it out in the postseason. Coming up next, we get to weigh some MVP odds and coaching openings. right, thanks to Marshall Newhouse for stopping by here. And thank you to everyone, by the way, that watches us live here every Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern. We appreciate the folks in the YouTube comments and the chat there and all that stuff. We will have plenty of breakdown of the teams that are going to be a part of and participating in the NFL playoffs. Coming up as we go along this week, we'll have plenty of college football playoff talk as we get close to Thursday and Friday and the semifinal rounds there. But, Dad, today we know is one of the days in the NFL where the decisions get made about coaches. We're putting a bow on a lot of these teams that have now called the 2024-25 season quits by getting bounced from the dance here. And today has already been a day full of conversation about these coaching hires. And we know some of the new ones now. If anyone missed it before, it was announced Doug Peterson and the Jacksonville Jaguars were parting ways here. Trent Baalke, the GM, going to stay on and actually be a part of picking the next head coaching candidate there. And the New York Giants decided that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll would stay on and both retain their jobs in New York. But Dad, just minutes after the New England Patriots game the other day here, where Jerod Mayo, the Patriots actually go out and get a win, much to the chagrin of their fans who were all sitting there with that number one pick and all of the advantage they would have had as a team with their quarterback holding the number one pick. They go out and win a game against the Buffalo Bills, and now all of a sudden fall down to the fourth pick in the upcoming NFL draft. And Jerod Mayo goes out there, talks to the media after the game, and then almost immediately we see that text card statement come up from the New England Patriots that he would be fired and no longer be the NFL head coach for the New England Patriots. You mentioned he is yet another one and done. What'd you say, 13 one and done coaches since 2011 in the NFL? Just an insane bit of turnover. So that one, not surprising to a lot of people here, Dad. Ultimately, what do you think becomes of Jerod Mayo, and was this the right decision for the Patriots?
Well, I'm always skeptical of pulling the trigger after 1 year. What I don't know is the inside. I don't know what the locker room mechanics were like with head coach and players. I do know that he was dealt a horrible hand. I mean, if you were at all in an area of trying to build something, he was not given a chance. You had a bridge quarterback, you turned to a rookie quarterback, and your roster was basically depleted. What were you supposed to prove in that time? So was it a relationship with player and coach? Was there something more going on in the locker room? Because I think it's ridiculous. Unless there is just such tension and headbutting from coach to locker room to players that it's just not fixable, I find it ridiculous to fire a coach after 1 year. And it really seems like this is a situation where, I see the shiny toy down the road, which is better than the toy that I have. And that's Mike Vrabel. We knew Mike Vrabel was going to be a head coach again. He was an analyst for the Browns. That ended, so he was available to start doing interviews. And we knew that he, as a former head coach, and Ben Johnson as a possibility of a new head coach, were going to be the two hottest names out there. So was it just, well, yeah, we could give Jerod Mayo a chance, but we think Vrabel will. And listen, Vrabel has more experience between being a head coach, bringing in assistants. But are you just kind of pushing a guy out because you see a better guy and you hope a better guy can do something better? I'm not a fan of one and dones, again, unless it's just, kind of, in all honesty, kind of like an Urban Meyer deal where it's just completely falls apart. Because again, I mean, for these owners now, they have all the money in the world. Nobody's going to cry over it. How many coaches can you be paying at one time? Like Tepper in Carolina, I think paying 3. And Roger Goodell actually talking to the owners after 2 years ago or last year saying, guys, we got like $85 million in coaches that are sitting around not being head coaches anymore.
Maybe chill.
So, yeah. And again, it makes the Rooney Rule look ridiculous that the Patriots hire Mike Vrabel, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think, unfortunately, that's a conversation that the NFL has kind of had to try and figure out. How do we go and continue to enforce the spirit of the rule on this, of trying to provide opportunities to minority candidates, because we know they've been disadvantaged in that way for so long. That's going to be a separate conversation for another day on this, certainly, Dad. But with this one, I do think it's twofold. Part of it goes back to, like, I truly think Drake May looking as good as he did this year, it becomes the age-old decision that we see of once they get the guy at that position, and especially on a rookie deal, and you know what you've got in that commodity. And for the Patriots, you went through this before, right? You went through this with Mac Jones, where his rookie year looked really good, and then the next year you hired a special teams coach and a D coordinator to be his offensive coordinator, and everything went to hell. And that was with Bill Belichick, who at least had the hardware to justify those moves. But once you've got the good guy we know we like him, do we trust you to be the one that does all of this? And do we have the Bob Kraft statement about Jerod Mayo and letting him go? Because I do think this is the other part of this, Dad, where Robert Kraft and them put out a statement, and it was, for Robert Kraft, me personally, this is one of the hardest decisions I have ever made. I've known Jerod for 17 years. He earned my respect and admiration as a rookie in 2008 throughout his pick. Dad, we talked about it last week. Part of the reason I wasn't sure this would happen was because this guy was handpicked by ownership during the prior regime. And usually we know ownership comes with a lot of ego. And when these powerful, rich men make these decisions, it's going to be hard to knock them off of it because they view it as a reflection of themselves. And so there's part of me that wonders, in a season here where, hey, we saw some players still coming out and defending Jerod Mayo by the end. I think it was Jelani Tavai that went on radio and irked a bunch of New England area fans by saying fans need to kind of know their place. But Dad, how bad did it have to be behind the scenes for Robert Kraft, who clearly has an affinity for Jerod Mayo and clearly thought highly of him, for a guy that came from the cloth there in New England? How bad did it have to be behind the scenes for them to feel compelled to make this move is what I keep coming back to.
Obviously, there had to be some issues, but I do think the overriding issue is, what do we do for Drake May? Can Jerod Mayo, because with the thought that the offensive coordinator, Alex Van Pelt, would probably be gone, could Jerod Mayo, a one-year experienced head coach, bring in someone to develop Drake May? Or do we need to bring in a experienced head coach who has great connections around the league for offensive? Because remember, Mike Vrabel is a defensive guy. It wouldn't be Mike Vrabel bringing along Drake May. It would be who he brought in as an offensive coordinator. Or do you hire a young Ben Johnson-like offensive coordinator to work with your quarterback? I think that played a big part in it. Could Jerod Mayo pull off getting an offensive coordinator in there that could really develop Drake May?
And that will be the factor for whoever steps in now. Obviously, like you said, I'm with you, and I said the same thing. Drake May is priority number one for what comes next for this franchise here. As far as what comes next for some other franchises, Dad, it will be interesting to see if maybe Roger Goodell didn't have an effect on what goes on, but if in general more organizations are going to stop and consider that. We know and mentioned that the Giants are a part of that grouping here. It sounds like the Colts are going to stand pat with Shane Steichen, who was starting to maybe get some heat towards the end of the season. And then, of course, there's the Dallas Cowboys, where Jerry Jones and Mike McCarthy are going to be the object of fascination for a lot of people this week, as Mike McCarthy is set to become a free agent. He is not going to get fired. He's not under contract. He is set to be a free agent, and his contract is expiring at this point. Jerry Jones was asked about Mike McCarthy's status, and he said, I don't know that I'm considering making a change, is really what I'm trying to say. Mike is one of the best coaches that I think there is. He was made the coach here because I thought that, and he's done absolutely nothing to diminish my opinion of him as a coach. So, Dad, we talked about it a bit last week, but it'll be the question of, A, does Dallas feel the need to do something after a season that certainly was disastrous and is coach the easiest one? And two, if Mike McCarthy has other options in the marketplace, which people think potentially could be the case, does he want to come back to Dallas? So ultimately, how do you see this one shaking out? What do you think happens?
Well, I mean, this is a rarity. We rarely see a coach on an expired contract, right? So it's not all the talk of, will Jerry Jones bring back Mike McCarthy? You have to throw into the conversation, will Mike McCarthy want to come back? Because basically in 6 to 8 days, that's the window. I think it was January 12th or January 14th that Dallas had to try and work out a new deal. And Mike McCarthy could say, no, I guarantee you, we know how they agents backdoor and find out information. If Mike McCarthy has interest or other teams are interested in Mike McCarthy, he may choose to leave the Dallas Cowboys. He may not want to put up with it anymore. He may be a sought-after coach. I don't know that for a fact. There's always former coaches that get jobs, and there's new coordinators that gets jobs. But this one has a spin on it. It's not just, Jerry, are you going to bring Mike back? You can legitimately ask, Mike, do you want to be back, or are you going to take an opportunity somewhere else? He has like I said, about a week, does Jerry Jones to get a deal done before Mike is a complete free agent.
I think ultimately they probably end up sticking with each other. It felt like between what we saw as a result from the team down the stretch of the season, the opportunity, if the organization, and now this is always the key part here, is the organization going to learn anything from what happened this year? And remember, we saw some comments from Stephen Jones and company about, well, should we really have this much of our salary tied up in X amount of players at the top end of the roster, which should not be the takeaway after an offseason where you failed to do literally anything to help bolster a roster that was certainly coming to the tail end of this current core's viability in terms of some of your depth in key places. And so that could be a concern going forward. Is the front office going to meaningfully address the change that needs to happen there? Are they going to do the right thing and pay Micah Parsons, who, man, when he came back healthy, like, it should be so simple with this guy. And this organization that loves to make it complicated with their stars may just do that again here. But, Dad, I still do think ultimately the simplest solution, the Occam's razor to this, is probably the best one. And I think still both sides are probably going to be better off with the other under the umbrella going forward here in Dallas.
Yeah, I agree. And while Dallas takes their time in paying players, they usually pay them pretty well. Can we say the same for Cincinnati? Look at the position they're in. I mean, just what Jamar Chase is going to now. What Justin Jefferson makes $35 a year. Jamar Chase is going to be $38-40 a year. I mean, and Cincinnati took their time in paying it. They probably won't have enough to bring T. Higgins back either.
No, and Dad, like, I'm kind of okay with that. Like, at some point, I do think the offense, just with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, probably going to be okay. Like, it's your job at some point when you're paid like Joe Burrow is to go out here and make it work with a little bit of less. That's what we saw Josh Allen do. That was the nexus or the genesis of a lot of the MVP discussion for him was, hey, that team, yeah, they had to bring Amari Cooper over, but, you know, late stage Amari Cooper is not some world beater there. It was still Josh Allen made the offense better by being Josh Allen. You got to do that for Joe Burrow because, Dad, it's become clear. And it worked, like, as evidenced by this year in a season where they've got the triple crown among Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, and Trey Hendrickson on the other side defensively leading the NFL in sacks. You went out and bought Trey Hendrickson, and that one worked out here. Your record drafting defensive talent around your highly paid players has been dreck the last few seasons here. And because of that, like, I don't know if Lou Anarumo is going to be back coaching this defense. It might not be all his fault to the point of some of the personnel miscues we've talked about there, but I wonder if Cincinnati's going to feel the need to do something and then use some of that T. Higgins money to go and try and pay some defensive players, because, again, your draft record just has not been stellar on that side of the football as you've had to build around your highly paid quarterback.
And speaking of coordinators, Ken Dorsey out after 1 year. In Cleveland, Dickerson, their O-line coach, out after 1 year. He took over for Bill Callahan, who went with his son, Brian. Now, the O-line coach, I mean, he was dealt a tough blow there. I mean, with the injuries to the O-line. I mean, what was he supposed to do? But Dorsey out after 1 year, so Cleveland, Stefanski will be back, and they're looking for a new O-coordinator as well.
You have to imagine Kevin Stefanski probably going to take play calling duties back over after that. I saw a lot of people bantering that around. Like, he's a guy on his best day can be one of the better play callers in the NFL and has shown that. And so whoever is going to be under center for them next year. And we know, listen, Kevin Stefanski, while some people talked about his job security, and listen, for him in that front office that were all complicit in the Deshaun Watson decision to some extent, have to wear that the way most organizations do with their quarterback decision. Ultimately, Kevin Stefanski was a year removed from making chicken salad out of chicken you-know-what and taking a team to the playoffs that used 4 different quarterbacks. He probably was never really in jeopardy of losing his job. But now this next decision they make on quarterback and what happens with that most certainly going to be the defining characteristic of whatever happens next with Kevin Stefanski. So that'll be the one to watch there. But again, we'll keep an eye out this morning for more NFL job news as it becomes available. Coming up next, though, let's talk about that souring relationship in South Beach. Could one of the best receivers in the NFL be on the move yet again? That's next here on GoJo Golic. So things got a little messy in South Beach yesterday here. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr. back here on GoJo and Golic. And the Miami Dolphins, who yesterday, Dad, during their game, realized that they were not going to be able to make the postseason by way of the Denver Broncos going and blowing out the Kansas City Chiefs. They rendered the cases for the Cincinnati Bengals and the Miami Dolphins meaningless by their result as they controlled their own destiny in the AFC wildcard picture. And so a Dolphins team that was already down to Snoop Huntley again back at quarterback because of the injury to Tua Tagovailoa seemed like they were in a tough spot here. The game certainly then reflected that as the New York Jets got a win in what could have been Aaron Rodgers' final game, but was not ready for what we got on the microphone after this game here, as Tyreek Hill was an interesting no-show during the game here, and when asked about it after, offered this quote about not only the game, but his future in Miami as a whole.
This is my first time. I haven't been in the playoffs, man. So, I mean, for me, like I said, man, I just got to do what's best for me and my family, dog. If that's here, if that's wherever the case may be, man, I'm finna open that door for myself, dog. As I'm opening the door, like I'm out, bro. You know, so it was great playing here, but.
So that seemed like a man who already has the decision made on the button he's going to press this offseason. And Dad, he had referenced being taken out of the game largely due to the fact that it was a decision based on injuries that he had already suffered, based on the fact that their postseason chances were null at that point. But when Mike McDaniel was asked about his availability during the game after, he sang an entirely different tune. Listen to this.
Informed that he was unavailable right before a drive. I was not informed that it was a new injury, and I think at that point in time my focus was on the players, and I didn't take the time to go try to figure out more into that. Just there was guys on the field that were competing, and we were trying to win a game.
Dad, I don't know about you. The message seems pretty clear there in the disconnect between what the player is saying and what the coach is willing to go along with. We know Mike McDaniel seems like one of the biggest pro player guys, seems like one of the more young, laid-back coaches, and that looked like a man that was infinitely frustrated by the situation with his star wide receiver in this. So is this over and done? Does it seem like Tyreek Hill, 1 year into a new 3-year deal, is already out of Miami?
Well, I mean, again, I always am mindful of when comments are made, and rarely do I take comments to heart right when a season ends. when frustration is at its highest. And there's no doubt frustration is at its highest from the standpoint, as he said, of not making the playoffs, the standpoint of the previous 2 years, he had 119 receptions in each of those years and 170 targets in each of those years. This year, he had 40 fewer receptions in 81, basically 50 fewer targets, and didn't reach 1,000 yards, where the last 2 years each, he was over 1,700. So I personally will pump the brakes on this one a bit, because it was right after the last game, right when the season ended, before coaches, players have a chance to kind of sit down, take a breath. They kind of speak too quickly at times, but this is a day and age where everything gets out there, and players can be emotional at times, and Tyreek Hill certainly was to a point. So while it sounded serious, it sounded like, yeah, he's done, I will take it as it was a right after the season, emotions run high. Sometimes things are said that aren't really meant.
So, and this is, a little bit different than the situation coming out of Kansas City, right? Where he was going to be due more money, and the Chiefs at that point had to make decisions about their future there. They allowed Tyreek to go and do what he did and go to Miami, and the rest is sort of history. With those two there, as we mentioned, he just signed that 3-year extension. Him and Jalen Waddle both paid by the Miami Dolphins to try and go around here. And in the longer version of that soundbite, he mentioned the real elephant in the room for Miami this season was, hey, the head injury to Tua Tagovailoa that kept him out on IR for 4 weeks in a huge pivotal swing of their season, and not having QB1 out there. Dad, I think changed a lot of people's view in some ways of Mike McDaniel, right? And just how inept that team looked when they were forced to go to their backup quarterback options in an offense and with a coach who's the play caller that a lot of people had ascribed a lot of Tua Tagovailoa's success to.
Well, and that's obviously something McDaniel's going to have to address, right? Because Tua is still their quarterback, and Tua has gotten injured. Again, he had the head injury, and then he missed the last couple games because of the hip. That was the same hip that he hurt coming out of Alabama, though he said it was a different spot, but it was the same hip. So let's be honest, he's injury prone. So you would better have a backup that knows the system. And as I've always said about backups, they're there to keep your head above water until your starter comes back. And boy, they looked like a team that was just completely lost when they went to their backup quarterback. So that's a position that he needs to address.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, like, the stock answer to that equation usually is sign Tyrod Taylor or Jameis Winston, right? Like, that tends to be the answer if you need a competent backup quarterback in the room. The Jets were that team last offseason that got taken to task for not having an answer behind Aaron Rodgers outside of Zach Wilson, and that went poorly. And so they signed Tyrod Taylor. For the Cleveland Browns this year, it was Jameis Winston. I don't know if you can put Jameis Winston in a Shanahan-McVay offense. I get that Kevin Stefanski is akin to that tree in some ways here, but I wonder if you can get Jameis to come in and paint by numbers enough, because he's my vote. Like, if someone needs a backup quarterback, I want Jameis Winston as the guy there that's next in command, just because of the incredible entertainment that it gives all of us both on and off the field. But I don't know if he necessarily fits the billing for what we think of as a quarterback in that offense, Dad.
Yeah, I think that may be a tough fit, but I'm with you. I mean, he's a player's guy, and certainly I think would fit in that locker room. But listen, Miami, let's be honest, they need to do everything they can to keep Tyreek Hill. As I mentioned, the last 2 years, over 170 targets, 119 receptions, and 1,700 yards. You're going to take that out of your offense? I mean, that will cripple your offense. So, like I said, emotions run high right after the season. Can they calm Tyreek Hill down and show him and convince him, hey, things will be better next year?
So, and Tyreek Hill is, I believe, 30 now, right? Yeah, so he's 30 years old, going to be 31 next year in that season. So while he's on the wrong side of 30, and while certainly you worry about injury with him as well, for a guy whose hallmark is the most unique blend of athleticism I think we've seen at the receiver position, if not ever, at least in a long time. He's super unique in his skill set. Dad, at the very least, I'm sure the phone's going to start ringing for Miami in a hurry because, to your point, you're not that far away from incredible production, and he is the kind of guy that changes the nature of the way defenses have to play you going forward. And so I'm sure some teams are going to try and swing on him offer-wise here. It's just a matter of, to your point, does it become untenable enough behind the scenes? And again, the only reason I give it some credence is because that level of frustrations there from Mike McDaniel does not seem like, oh, this 1 week of frustration. Like that, he doesn't seem like the kind of guy that, to your point, is going to overreact off one instance at the end of the season here, at least not as we've come to know him. And so that's the only interesting part to me is, has this been simmering for long enough to all of a sudden make this a more realistic conversation here sooner than later? And at the very least, how many other teams are going to step up and try and pry him out of there?
Yeah, and I mean, listen, he's a guy that a contending team, he's not like he costs you a lot of money, a couple of years and $55 million left on a deal. It's not like a quarterback or a pass rusher or a cornerback contract out there. This is a manageable contract for a team that's on the verge, and Tyreek Hill may just feel like he doesn't trust the fact that Tua can stay healthy long enough. Now, again, would he have to try and pull a power play to get traded? Say, I'm not showing up. It could get uglier before it gets better, if it gets better at all. But I would think that because it's not a horrific number that a team trading for him would pick up. They would just have to give up assets as well.
Another question hanging over this upcoming NFL offseason that is certain to have plenty of them. Coming up next, though, we've got answers for you and how we'll end the show. It's this, that, and the third, which includes another landmark record for LeBron James and the Is It Cakeification of America continuing its march towards oblivion. Next on GoJo and Golic. All right, time to finish off the show the way we always do. This, that, and the third. 3 quick ones to send you into the rest of the day. Make sure you download, subscribe, rate, and review the show. Leave us a 5-star rating, and check us out live Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern, right here live on the DraftKings Network. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Almost 2,000 of you out there. We appreciate everyone who comes and checks us out there. All of our live shows go on there. All the videos and specific interviews that you see on the show, all in one umbrella. So hit subscribe, smash the bell so you know when we're going live each and every day. If you miss us there, though, or any of our guests, and thank you to Trevor Sikkema from Pro Football Focus, who joined us in hour number 1, and Marshall Newhouse from the DraftKings Network, who joined us in hour number 2. You can catch both of those interviews wherever you get our podcast or right here on YouTube as soon as we get done with the show. Dad, let's get to this ho-hum, another record in the books for LeBron James. He scored 30 points again the other night to now become the NBA's career leader in 30-point games, surpassing Michael Jordan's record during the Lakers' 119-102 victory over the Hawks on Friday night. So he now has 563 career 30-point games, passing Michael Jordan's career 562. Wilt Chamberlain third on that list, unsurprisingly, with 516. So, Dad, him doing this while also being top 5 in assists in NBA history right now just continues to showcase the longevity and continued height of his accomplishments.
Oh, I mean, listen, there's the side, just great accomplishments. And then there's the side of people that will say, well, he took 452 more games played than Michael Jordan to get to have one more 30-point game. And there is something to that too, right? I mean, there are two sides to the coin of how long it takes you to get to certain levels. Now, again, how well LeBron is playing at 40 years old is just unprecedented. It's just incredible. And he could go, I'm sure, another year or two if he wanted to. His athletic ability, his ability to stay in shape and keep his body going at this age is unbelievable. But that's what people will say on the other side is he needed so many more games to accomplish, what Michael Jordan did.
Yeah, certainly. I just think more the fact that LeBron James continues to amass these all-around records when we know the hallmark of his game is being more of a facilitator. I think at his size, that point-forward mentality has sort of been the thing, at least in my mind, that will define a lot of my memory of LeBron James. And so the fact that, oh, by the way, he's now the all-time leading scorer and the all-time leader in 30-point games as sort of a side quest is just sort of a hilarious reminder. Like, I was talking about this with someone, off air over the holiday break, and just how hopefully when we're all done with the LeBron and Jordan brain rot that's happened during LeBron's career, we'll just all take solace in the fact that, like, this guy that we met as a 16-year-old on the cover of SI, who we were watching his high school games and was told would be the next Jordan, actually went out and accomplished all of this with the weight of the world on his shoulders, the changing media landscape. It is truly insane to consider the sheer tonnage of what he was faced with and what he has accomplished in the face of that.
I think one of the more amazing things is I just saw it, and I don't know what the two players on what team, but there are two players on an NBA team that were born right after Michael Jordan was a rookie in the league. I mean, Michael Jordan started playing in the league, and these two guys are now in the league and were born a little bit after, or they started playing a little bit after Michael Jordan was playing in the league, was a rookie in the league. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, certainly. It just all does also serve to make us feel very, very old here. So I will move away from that and instead make us feel very, very hungry, Dad, as we get to that. And we came off of the Netflix Christmas Day games, marveling at the fact that they gave Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and the rest of these guys footballs that were actually cake. Is it cake? Popular Netflix show. So leaning into the bit. The same thing was done by the home bakery in Rochester, Michigan, that leaned into the bit of Amon-Ra St. Brown's now famous touchdown celebration, mimicking one of the players from Incarnate Word who did the headstand celebration in the end zone. The home bakery did an actual recreation of Amon-Ra St. Brown doing a headstand as cake, Dad, and displayed it prominently in the front of their store. I, like you, I'm sure, marvel at what these bakers can do with some fondant in time. It's insane.
Well, it looks like it's actual life size as well. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. When you make like an artful cake, what I'm looking for the best of both worlds. I want it to look very cool, but I want it to taste good. And it gets difficult when you have to use a firmer fondant, right? It just, because you need it to help make the shapes that you're going to make, but the firmer the fondant, a fondant is the icing that's thicker, that you can roll, that you can shape. It just doesn't taste as good. So sometimes it hurts the taste of the cake. Even though the cake looks cool, I want it to look cool, and then I want to cut into it, and I want to enjoy the cake as well.
I have a sick affinity for fondant. Maybe it's just I am so like 2 generations of diabetic into sugar that even that compressed firm version is something that in a weird way, kind of like candy corn, I like more than I should. Doesn't really turn me off with this stuff. And Dad, to a certain point, like, this is a beacon in the night. People will walk by this and go, man, surely if they can make a life-size Amon-Ra St. Brown, they can make my wedding cake. They can make my bar mitzvah. Like, they can do whatever I need them to do, or make a delicious cake in general. So I'm using it more as like, a benefit of the doubt of their skill everywhere else. But I would still take a bite of Amon-Ra St. cake, to be clear.
I would too. I am not as fan of thicker fondant as you are. I just basically eat the cake and leave the fondant. It's just too much for me, too thick and too sweet, if you can believe that. But listen, we're taking away from the headline here. It's a very, very cool cake. A headstand of Amon-Ra St. Brown, a life-size size. It was very, very cool.
Shouts out to the home bakery. Hope they get a big boom in business off this. You love to see that. Dad, we'll be interested if people love to see this. More interesting news is we know the world of NCAA athletics is constantly changing here, but saw a report that the NCAA told College Hoops Today that they're considering allowing 5 years of eligibility for players in all sports moving forward. No timetable for this decision will be made, but they said the topic expected to be discussed early in 2025. Dad, this comes off the heels of, we know, Diego Pavia as one of the players being able to position for yet another year of eligibility here. We just came off that McCormick player at Miami playing his 9th year of college football. And we know the pandemic era players, all of them received that COVID extra year. We got these 6th and 7th year super seniors because of this. And so where are you at on the idea of college becoming a full-time 5-year plan potentially?
Well, I mean, those names you mentioned and things you mentioned were kind of extenuating circumstances for longevity in college. But this now can become the norm, especially if you come from a JUCO, because aren't they looking at not counting JUCO against your college eligibility? So you could actually go a couple of years in JUCO and then go 5 years into college. You could literally be 25 years old when you're a senior, if you go JUCO for a couple of years and then 5 years of college. So listen, I've been a proponent of stay in college as long as you can. The real world sucks. Stay in college, enjoy sports, enjoy the college atmosphere as long as you can. But you start getting into, 5 years, and then you start to add an injury year on top of that, or 2, depending on if a player gets hurt. Boy, oh boy, it's really, really getting up there in time.
Well, I mean, between this and the revenue share, this is kind of a move towards what would feel more like a full-blown minor league, where now you're doing away with some of the old restrictions that used to be tied to the 4 years it takes someone to graduate to college. So much of the collegiate athletic experience was wrapped around, hey, you're here to actually fulfill the academic qualifying parts of this first. And now this would be moving towards, hey, you're just here to play, especially if you're making money, play. And if you're not someone that's capable of going and earning beyond that, then you've at least got a home here to continue to earn before you get ready to go and declare for the workforce, the way that one Washington linebacker did, who made what looked like a draft announcement, but then finished it off by saying he was open to work and gave everyone the link to his resume and LinkedIn bio. So this will be interesting to see, man. I know Lane Kiffin took some shots at the Diego Pavia situation, but that's, I said, this moved steadily towards being more of a full-time minor league than anything resembling the prior model as this continues to go. We continue to go and hope you download, subscribe, rate, and review the show. Check us out Monday through Friday, live 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.